Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's time for our first guest on Live from the Heartland show for the week of December 14th, the year 2024. And we've had Pat Handlin on the show numerous times, usually talking about water or Native Americans. And this week I got an email from Pat, which had information from the Water Protectors Legal Collective about Leonard Peltier. And I had just written my Congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky, who sent out an e-newsletter about what are we most interested in. And I didn't see this on there, but I said, I'm most interested in you helping to get Biden to give clemency or pardon or whatever the proper way is and free Leonard Peltier. Leonard has been, he's an 80-year-old guy. He's a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa and Lakota, Dakota descent. He's the longest serving political prisoner in United States history. On December 4th, Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii, who is the chair of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, took the congressional floor to advocate for Biden to grant Leonard Peltier clemency. Senator Schatz has been a staunch advocate for Mr. Peltier since 2022. So with all that said, let's bring on Pat, who is much closer to the nitty-gritty about what's going on. And for the younger people who haven't followed this for years, listen up. It's really an important case. And for older people, you've been thinking about it for a long time. And this will give us an opportunity to at least turn out a little bit of support for Leonard's freedom as he ages. Okay, good morning to you, Pat, and thanks for listening while I rambled on a little bit.
Morning. Nice to see you, Michael.
It's good to see you. So how about giving us a little history on the Leonard Peltier case? I know that there's a book out by Peter Mathiasen. I remember doing a long review in the Heartland Journal on it. That book got taken off the shelves because of a suit, but it has the history. But we're not going to all read the book right now. We're going to listen to you. So take it away.
So Leonard Peltier was one of the early leaders of the American Indian movement, AIM. And he was actually, I didn't know this until I was looking again at information for today. He was a boarding school survivor. I don't know if your listeners know the history of boarding schools in the United States, but it was part of the genocide of indigenous peoples that followed basically the military forced removal of indigenous people from their lands, creation of treaties and reservations. And then after that, they created these schools where Indian children were forcibly taken from their families, literally, and put in these schools. And they were places of great violence and sexual and physical abuse. And the goal of the schools was to remove Indian children from their cultures, from their families, their language, their cultures. And it went on until like the 1960s and 70s. Anyway, he was a product of those boarding schools for 3 years. He was taken from his grandmother, literally, and he made it back home. But he became an advocate for indigenous people, for his people. After that, as he grew up, and he did a lot of terrific things. But what his case is about is that he and some other AIM leaders were on a ranch called the Jumping Bull Ranch in 1975 when the FBI allegedly looking for another person came onto the ranch, did like basically a reign of terror, forcing themselves into people's homes, looking for this guy, and not Leonard. And ultimately, there ended up being 2 agents ended up dead, shot. Other Indigenous people ended up dead at that time also. But Leonard was charged with other people, 2 of whom went to trial before he did and were found not guilty. And then he went to trial, having fled to Canada, and then he was extradited back. And he went to trial, and they really didn't have any direct evidence of his guilt of him. They argued that he shot the 2 FBI agents, but they didn't have any evidence, any direct evidence. They didn't have an eyewitness. They had a shell casing that they linked to a gun he supposedly had at the time. And theoretically, it was the only one on the ranch that could have shot this shell casing that was found near where the agents were shot. But it turned out that shell casing, that there were 2 FBI ballistics reports regarding that single shell casing. One said it matched to the gun that supposedly Peltier had. The other said it did not. And that was kept from the defense. So once it was found through after the trial, after the conviction, the sentence of 2 life sentences, a Freedom of Information Act revealed this, what's called legally exculpatory evidence, the second ballistics report. And so the defense team did what's called a habeas corpus petition, and they sought to overturn the conviction, at least bring it back to court. And the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, because it was in federal court. Leonard Peltier is in federal custody, was convicted in a federal court. The Eighth Circuit is the appellate circuit for the district court where he was convicted. And this was in 1986. They reviewed the evidence. The shell casing, and they ended up not overturning the conviction. And what they said was their conclusion. This is a quote from the decision. There is a possibility, quote unquote, that the jury would have acquitted Leonard Peltier had the records and data improperly withheld from the defense been available to him in order to better exploit and reinforce the inconsistencies, casting strong doubts upon the government's case. Yet, we are bound by the Bagley test, it's a case, requiring that we be convinced from a review of the entire record that had the data and records withheld been made available, the jury probably would have reached a different result. We have not been so convinced. So, is it a possibility? The Eighth Circuit acknowledges that the jury could have reached a different conclusion, but they decided that it wasn't probable. So they left Leonard Peltier in jail to become the longest serving political prisoner in U.S. history on the basis of very questionable prosecution. So in fact, his clemency petition was drafted by a lawyer named Kevin Sharp, who's a former United States District Court judge. He's a lawyer in Nashville. And it's possible to access the clemency petition online. Kevin Sharp has been interviewed by a variety. You can Google Kevin Sharp and Leonard Peltier and find an interview with Kevin Sharp. But in fact, they don't know who killed the agents. The case against Leonard Peltier, I would argue, is flimsy enough that he should have been given a new trial, but he wasn't. He's also been denied parole repeatedly. And the United Nations, various United Nations agencies have asked that he be released, have supported his bid for clemency. Many Indigenous organizations support his bid for clemency. In 2022, there was an 1,100-mile walk to Washington, D.C. By a variety of Indigenous organizations seeking his release on clemency. So the clemency petition is pending. It's before President Biden, who just granted pardon to his own son. And of all the people, there are a number of people who deserve clemency, and Leonard Peltier is definitely one of them. He's 80 years old. He poses absolutely no threat to anyone. He's a revered elder, Indigenous elder, and he was. One could argue that he was a target of COINTELPRO, the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover written policy against primarily leaders of color, the Black Panther Party, the Indigenous, the American Indian Movement, other organizations, radical organizations from the 70s who advocated really for justice for folks. And so the clemency petition is pending. Leonard Peltier is being kept. He's kept 1,000 miles away from his family, his children and grandchildren. And so the public effort is what will result in his release if it happens. So that's why the Water Protector Legal Collective, which I have a history with, has sent an email, and I believe that you're going to post there a link to the email for President Biden and a phone number for folks to advocate for clemency for Leonard Peltier.
Pat, let me just say that you can contact the whitehouse.gov/contact. You could call 202-456-1111. And if you get the email announcing the show, it'll be there in the description. Let me ask you a couple of questions. You talked about Native American kids. Well, maybe I'll just make comments. Who knows? But Native American children being taken from their homes. And I have a good friend up on the Menominee Reservation, and he always told me a few horror stories about when he was fostered out and taken away from his family. And I know that the FBI has been a principal blocker of any improvement in Leonard's situation. You know, it was the FBI got really behind keeping him in prison, denying parole, that kind of thing. I believe Biden did make a comment maybe within the last year about Leonard Peltier, about being open to it. I don't know if you remember that or if it's come up, but
I don't know. Wasn't. I hope that's true.
Yeah, we hope.
But if it is true, if he's open to it, then that means even more how important it is that people let him know, you know, that citizens of this nation let Biden know that we support clemency for Leonard Peltier. It's not a pardon, you know, it's a clemency. It's mercy. It's granting mercy to an 80-year-old man who spent more of his life in the penitentiary than he did as a free man, and an elderly, sick man who should be allowed. I mean, what are we spending our money for? Keeping him in the penitentiary? That's the right wing argument. But at the same time, he should be released, and it's up to us, in reality, to advocate.
Yeah, I would encourage people to, if they can find the book, Peter Mathiassen's book on Leonard Peltier is a wonderful book. You can find a lot of information online. I think it is really important that we contact our Congress people. And in this case, probably the majority of our listeners are in Jan Schakowsky or nearby, congressional districts. And I do encourage everybody to really do what they can to bring this to attention again. I don't know what's happening locally around here on the ground, but I know that nationally there are people who are trying to encourage people to turn out and support the clemency. Any parting words, Pat?
Yes. I mean, Senator Schatz is not the only official who has supported clemency for Leonard Peltier. Bernie Sanders has too. And there are others who have supported clemency for Leonard Peltier. And if anyone, and I would encourage people to go to the Water Protector Legal Collective website if they want to learn more, because there are links on that website. Leonard Peltier, if you go to the political prisoner words at the top of the screen when you get to that website, there's more information about Leonard Peltier. There's information on about some of the UN joint statements regarding his clemency. Also, if anybody wants to read an article about the boarding schools, The Atlantic had an article by an Indigenous woman named Mary Annette Pember. That is a really good article. But for Leonard Peltier, I would encourage you to please contact President Biden and support clemency, gentlemen.
We know that the millions of people listening and watching our show are going to have heard this call, and I got to be careful what I say about calls to action. But if you want to be really good about supporting democracy and fairness, get on it. Pat Handlin, it's always great to see you in person or on the Zoom, and
you too, Michael.
It won't be long till we see you again.
Thank you for doing what you do.
I appreciate that. I get a lot of accolades on the show.